An author, motivator, and conference speaker, Pastor Paul Adefarasin is one of the most respected and sought-after ministers in Nigeria. His weekly television program, Something is About to Happen, is broadcast into millions of homes across Africa and Europe. As pastor of House on the Rock in Lagos, Nigeria, Paul Adefarasin is well known for his clear message of hope, healing, and empowerment. He is widely regarded as a visionary leader and bridge builder. His ability to transcend race, tribe, and creed with his unique approach to ministry has seen to the forging of many strategic relationships between the church and secular communities in Africa. Now get ready as Bishop T.D. Jakes and Pastor Paul Adefarasin enlighten us on the subject of the contemporary impact of African Nigerian Christianity nationally and globally.
I want to say good evening to the class. As the Chancellor of Jake's Divinity School, it is our custom to have lectures and or interviews with interesting people that will add to the continuity, the integrity, and the depth to which you think, expose you to a more global perspective as you pursue upper-level academics, and allow you to peer into the room and into the mind and into the lives of people who are literally shaking the world from their perspective. Tonight, I'm honored to have, all the way from House on the Rock, Pastor Paul Adefarasin from Lagos, Nigeria. As the intro has alerted you, he is quite distinguished and quite accomplished in his own right. Tonight, as a topic, we are going to discuss the contemporary impact of African Nigerian Christianity nationally and globally. Welcome, Pastor Paul Adefarasin. It's good to have you.
Well, it's delightful to be in your company and in your presence, and a tremendous honor to serve the Divinity School. And perhaps one day I might be a student enrolling there.
We'd love to have you anytime, my friend. You come teach if you want. You have a very broad perspective. Being a son of the soil of Nigeria, your father was a distinguished and highly respected diplomat. You were of the upper echelon of Nigeria. Your family was. Your mother's Jamaican. So you have the infusion of those cultural experiences. You were educated both in the U.S. and in London, and you are a pretty global person in your perspective of ministry. I'm wondering, I often think that God uses in unique ways people who think more globally than people who think more communally. If you think about Moses, if you think about the Apostle Paul, who was multilingual and very diverse and was able to be used, in spite of Peter's intense passion, Paul was able to be used to write most of the New Testament because of his ability to be global in his thinking and global in his outreach. Moses, who was a Hebrew child raised in the house of Pharaoh as an Egyptian, then trained by Jethro and the Midianites, is impacted by this cultural globalism. How has your global experiences shaped your worldview, and how has it shaped the way in which you lead the many churches that are up under your auspices, as well as the House on the Rock in Lagos?
Bishop, it is very interesting that as we pass through life's shaping moments and the seasons where he molds us as clay in the potter's hands, we are often so unaware of what his intentions are. But because he's such an intentional God, looking back in history at the exposure to systematic academics in the UK, and then on to university in Miami, and experiencing a wide range of cultures in the melting pot of America, and also seeing the ups and downs of civilization in the Western Hemisphere, it certainly prepared me to be more than communal, more than just a Lagosian, more than just a Nigerian. And Nigeria in itself is nearly 400 or 500 tribes and at least 300 languages. So it's a microcosm of many things beyond just the global. and like you have often taught us, the importance of being global in our outlook helps to serve relevance at home, without which you really don't have a platform, and then relevance globally across what is very quickly becoming a singular village with its own unique culture, particularly as you look at Generation Next, Generation Z, the millennials. I'm just at the tail end of the baby boomers, so I get to see all sides of that world. But it was a furnishing, it was a kitting and a fitting for the opportunity to take Africa's experience and speak it to the world in a global language. That has been very useful and helpful. One of the things I must say is exposure to the American church was also a head lifter, an eye opener, and a cultural shock of sorts to the Nigerian church.
How so?
Well, the Nigerian church had its first experience with Western interpretation of the scriptures from the English and European missionaries, the Wilberforces, the David Livingstons, the Mary Slessors, the William Careys, and the likes. And that exposure gave us a different view of Christianity that had an ulterior motive to it simultaneously, which was colonization, the British Empire, the Dutch Empire, the Portuguese Empire. Whereas in more contemporary times, the first exposure to the American church, which came late to Africa, was the Word of Faith movement, the Kenneth Hagins, the Frederick Prices, who gave us a bit of color in that mixture. And that was what adhered to people who wanted more than what the missionaries offered. Now, the missionaries had great impact in Africa with healthcare, education. Their social relevance was very important. They brought some justice to that space. Whereas the Word of Faith movement brought word. And it really was formularistic. It was typically what Word of Faith is, and it brought a lot of eager yearning for the scriptures. And it helped the church to move beyond religiosity to believing in God. But then some years after that, a thundering voice that was brought up in the hills of West Virginia leapt off the television screens in America, aided by technology. And here in Africa with satellite television, we saw this giant of a gentleman with wit and wisdom in his knowledge of scripture, and such a charismatic anointing, undergirded by a significant character that bounded to our television sets. And before we could blink, it went to our smartphones, which came in a few years afterwards. And what was powerful about that, Bishop, is we didn't know there was a movement like that ongoing in the States. And so you're launching into American awareness, the public consciousness of the American state, was one development. But as immediately as you hit the screens in America with a new message, with a different understanding, new perspectives, with a message of justice, a message of inclusion, a message of liberation, a message of responsibility, it likewise came to a few of us in Africa who were equipped to understand and to hear and to drive that message further. And it's creating quite a stir in Africa, and it's given those who carry that message a significant prominence, which obviously is intentional on God's side for helping to reform Africa, to help reform Africa's theology, to help the African church to participate a lot more significantly in the development of Africa, in the market space, and also in the public sector. And it's a very welcome development.
You know, when you think about where the African church is, and for the benefit of our students, one of the things that I'm committed to is making sure that they do not become so engulfed with American issues that they lose sight of the fact that if you stomp your foot in America, it echoes in Africa, Australia, London, around the world. You're no longer talking to a congregation. If you're streaming, you're talking to the world, and people are watching from Japan, and people are watching from Israel. And that means that we have to have a global awareness and a global understanding in our conversation that our problems are not seen in isolation. And yet there is a camaraderie of suffering that is shared amongst our churches and our countries and our world, certainly Black people, as it relates to similar types of agonies and atrocities and adversities through which we have had to overcome. That continuity, that koinonia, that fellowship that is uniquely found in the Lion's Den, shared with people of similar fears and woes and concerns. In many ways, African Americans are a reflection of African culture, a waning middle class that is struggling to find itself. The threat of technology coming and taking away the jobs that established the middle class put us in a position that we could easily, if we were a country, the 40 million of us that exist in the U.S., we could easily be a third world country or an emerging country with the absence of a middle class. So middle class is critical. When you look at the times in which we live, and you look at George Floyd and what happened to him and Black Lives Matter, it was shocking to see that the echo came globally from, or not just nationally, but globally around the world. People stood not only as a solidarity with the abuse to which he was inflicted, but also a solidarity to their ability to empathize because they have similar injustices and abuse of power around the world. That message was as global as anything that I have ever preached. And it was an illustrated sermon and a negative one, but it certainly brought in a global audience. How do you, as a pastor, view the similarities that exist between African Americans and Africans in terms of suffering?
Bishop, I quickly remember a maxim that says absolute power corrupts absolutely. And as it is in America, we find the same over here. Whilst you were battling and grappling with Black Lives Matter and George Floyd, we were grappling with NSARS in Nigeria, where law enforcement were usurping far beyond their authority and abusing the populace and killed many people unjustly, the misuse of force. And that created a huge ruckus over here in Lagos. And the young people of Africa came out, people to whom the future belongs, and they began to protest misleadership, misgovernance, mismanagement of authority in a very strong and profound way that it had the authorities here quite trepid, quite afraid that a revolution was ensuing. And the result was that was quickly quelled with pretty amazing force beyond what would normally obtain in civilization. So our circumstances are quite the same in that respect. So all lives matter. Mm-hmm. And in America, the challenges that we face are often interracial. Mm-hmm. And that's really just three races. Mm-hmm. And they're sometimes interclass wars. But here in Nigeria, it's intertribal. And then externally, we have the interracial challenges between the Western Hemisphere, generally Caucasian, and the African or global South atmosphere. And that has a lot to do with exploiting our resources, simply because there's complicity at the top over here in Africa, across the space, at the expense of the development of our people. So our issues are not dissimilar. And the church then has to step into all of this and play the role of bridge builder, peacemaker, and quietly consult with leadership in the public sector space, and also talk to our youth. And youth in Africa is everything up to 35, up to 40. And in many respects, I'm considered a youth because of my manner. And that's a useful tool in the work we do, because without identification, there can really not be any real impact And so sitting with leaders in the public sector and talking through with them the importance of a hearing ear and a humane heart to hear the voice of the people who own tomorrow and whose rights and benefits are presently across much of the space being squandered today at tomorrow's expense, that it's really hugely important, and there must be inclusion for young voices, young hearts, young minds in the conversation as to how to make Africa a better place. And that's a difficult challenge because power tends to lure people to a place of self-centeredness, of self-seeking, and the public space is not generally used in its best opportunities to serve the populace. So across much of our space, we don't always have the best serving the rest. It's often the worst lording it over the rest. And that's a big challenge for Africa. We don't lack the capacities or the competence amongst our people, but the political architecture and the political process doesn't really make space or room for the best to provide leadership. And that's a real challenge for the church. Your administration in the United States, as in Joseph Biden, the president of the United States, he has 8 Nigerians in very key positions in his administration at the very top.
Yes.
I think there's another nation, I think it's Kenya or Uganda, has almost as many or more. Now, if you just took 10 of those persons, put them in cabinet offices, created an agenda for justice, equity, and righteousness, which is what the Bible says the throne of the Lord is seated on, we could turn many of our African states around in relatively quick time. Because we're such a globalized village today, information is no longer the preserve of the Western Hemisphere. It's available to us at the click of a button. And we're getting an education, even if it's not formal for everybody, that sort of stands us in good stead with light, the light of education, knowledge, understanding, to provide real leadership to help show Africa the way out of her challenges and into her promised future. And the beauty of the American church is you already have exposure to the technology. You have exposure to the decades of learning. We're seeing the African-American church person rise to the fore of leadership as the respected voices and thinkers and leaders of thought in that world. And it's beginning to happen here, but the political process doesn't really allow much space, but it's burgeoning slowly and quietly like a virus. It's beginning to catch on, and we feel strongly and believe also that there's coming a day when Africa and her people will rise, because the church will learn to play her role as light to the world and salt to Africa.
You know, you touched on something. You touched on many things, and I would love to fully unpack, because I think one of the messages that you sent us is that the problem isn't the color of our skin, but it is of our sin, that even when people are the same color, they still abuse each other if power is not checked and managed. And it brought to mind several years ago when the then Senator Obama was running for president. A group of our ministers were having a big conversation about it, and several of them were in a big hoopla about, oh my God, a Black president. It's just amazing that in America we would see a Black president, and they were having a big fit of it. And one of my African members, I think he's Nigerian, spoke up and said, oh, what's the fuss? He says, we've been having Black presidents for years. It made no difference at all. And everybody was just stunned at the very idea of what he was saying. But what he was saying brought us to a sobriety that great leadership is more about kind than color, is more about character than melanin. And we suddenly began to grapple with it from a different perspective. As a leader, not just a preacher, but as a leader, you also mentioned using your influence to go in and talk to presidents in order to get things done. One of the things that has always intrigued me about Africa is the intersectionality because of colonialism, Nigeria is what, about 70 years old as a nation? Is that
61.
right?
61.
61. Okay. 61 years old as a nation. It is unfair for America, which is hundreds and hundreds of years old, to evaluate a country that's 61 years old. If you went back to America at 61 years old, we would not have infrastructure. We would not have a lot of things that we developed over time. And yet Africa is rapidly catching up now in terms of providing those realities. But colonialism brought a lot of damage too, because it infused a system on top of a system it would appear from the outside, it would be difficult for a person to identify themselves as one and say, I'm Yoruban or I'm Igbo or what have you. And now I have to understand myself outside of the context of my tribe. And though we have our own language and our own culture and our own food and our own way of communicating, now I have to understand myself for the last 61 years as a Nigerian and become proud to be a Nigerian. And now we have a president and a king and a chief. And so when you start talking about power in Africa, it is not just the president, it is also the chief. How do you as a leader navigate these two systems cohabitating and sometimes clashing within the context of the same people sitting in your pews?
That's an interesting one. And in some ways, it's engendered an important conversation along exactly these lines and how to mitigate our circumstances going forward and coming up with something that's not purely a replication of the American presidential system. And when you look across to our parental nation, the United Kingdom, the Queen of England is the head of state, but not the head of government. Mm-hmm. And the chieftaincy system in much of Africa holds sway with the heart of the people. And they generally don't meddle too much in politics, but they're encouraged to take a statesmanly sort of role and in ensuring that there's dialogue, that there's peace between parties, the local chief, the regional chief, the ethnic nation chief, and there are many in Nigeria, carry a lot of influence. And so—
Can you break those down? Can you break those three down for us?
Okay. You have at least 3 levels of chieftaincy in my part of Africa, and it's probably the same across most of Africa. So right here in a part of Lekki Peninsula, the kingdom here is called Ikate Elegushi, which simply means the egusi or watermelon farmland had a bale or an oba of the ground, the king of the ground. And he's the tribal chief of this area. However, he subscribes to the authority of the Oba of Lagos. And the Oba of Lagos is for the entirety of Lagos state. Mm-hmm. And many years ago in previous kingdoms, they dispersed the sons of that crown to different parts of the Lagos area. And they became chiefs and later were elevated to kings in their own right over these various regions. Now the
term Oba.
Oba means king. Mm-hmm. And in Yoruba land, we have Oba Ile, which is shortened to Oba. And Oba Ile means the king of the land. Then you have the Oba Orun, Oba Shorun, which is the king of the skies, because there's a spiritual responsibility too. That would be more like your military priesthood. And then you have the Obalogun, the king of iron. That means the implements of war and also some of the implements of farming. But they submit to the Oba Ile. And each regional Oba subscribes to a greater territory or greater territorial leader who would be the Oba of Lagos. And he in turn subscribes to the Oba over all of Yoruba land and all Yoruba people. So there's a structure there, and it dates back to antiquity. I belong to a royal family, and it's interesting that if you trace back through your royal family line as a Yoruba, you will end up with Oduduwa, and his grandfather in our mythology was Nimrod, known in the Yoruba dialect as Lamurudu. And so from Nimrod, we can go all the way back to Adam, and it gives us a sense of pedigree, or should we say apostolic succession, not necessarily the apostolicity that we would like, but it still gives us a sense of heritage, and it gives us the reminder that we come from a tradition of great city builders, of great leadership. Remember that Nimrod was a Hamitic man, a Cushite, and he was the first builder of cities. He was the first urbanizer of civilization, and his 5 sons were also great city builders. And we built great cities here in Africa. We had great civilization here in Africa. But once Europe had her advent into Africa as a colonial system, they employed the system called damnatia memoria, which is to wipe out all knowledge of our attainments in history, in our ancestry, which neuters us. It emasculates us and gives us a sense that we're a little better than apes sometimes. And when you're divorced that severely from your sense of history, you don't have shoulders to stand on. You once said something to me that, Paul, you have no reason to ever be a failure because you have me. As in, I have a Moses, but you had no Moses. All you had was eyes to see the invisible God. Right. And you talked to him, as in a manner of speaking, face to face, which gave you very direct revelation. But we have the privilege of standing on your shoulders, and he who has no father will not go much further. But when we stand on the shoulders of those who have trodden the path, are running their course in a massive relay, it gives us a sense of direction, a sense of impetus, a sense of antecedent, a sense of rootedness in something that offers us a future. And one of the things we're trying to do with Africa is re-educate Africa with our own curriculum that borrows from the global curriculum, because we still have to participate in global society and civilization, but to also recognize that we too are a people. We are people of great attainment. We led civilization at its beginning, and for quite a while, until maybe 500 years ago. There's much to be said about that. And then rather than absorbing ourselves merely in our tribality, we must begin to look at our nationality. And in dealing with our nationality as Africans or as Nigerians, we want to melt some of our differences without distorting the fact that we are all individually unique. The Berlin Treaty, where Africa was divided up by about 5 colonial master states or master empires, did such immense damage to the African psyche and put us at loggerheads with each other under the principle of divide and rule. And Africa must conquer that by finding her unity in our common creator. I love what America does when America says all men are created equal. She brings God into the Constitution without necessarily calling him by a particular biased nomenclature, so that all men recognize that we have a creator, and he was intentionally a designer in everything that he did. To sort of not talk too much, Bishop, because it's easy to.
No, it's good. No, you're not rattling on. It's very, very good, very, very interesting, and we're gleaning a lot of information. I'm sure our students are going wow, and feverishly writing notes, trying to keep up and dissect things that you take for granted. I've often told you that the things that you take for granted are mysteries unraveled to us. Your normal is very fascinating to us. The way you breeze through your chiefs and your order and your structure is information to us to better understand the complexities and the diversities of the world around us. Because for many of our students, not all, all of us actually, white, black, or brown, root back to Africa, the earliest cradle of civilization. So we're very fascinated to hear what you have to say.
It's interesting, Bishop, to also note that in England, they have a system where the monarchy ruled the land. It ruled the people. And then there was a revolt, and then institutions of government replaced the authority of the royal family, but the royal family was given a special place of dignity and play an important role in the ownership of the military. And Africa's looking for a similar balance without having to mimic the British, because our traditional chiefs held sway in Africa until the colonial masters took authority from them. And the result of that was they became more social as opposed to more governmental. We want to sort of bring them back as not merely an advisory council, but an opinion that matters. Because in our traditions, we take our problems and our challenges to our traditional rulers, because they do have influence, and they have influence because they control that realm. They have influence naturally in this realm because they're the landowners, which means they have resources. They give out leaseholds, sometimes freeholds, and that puts wealth in their hands. And they also have a way of creating sway with the people, because as a royal, you're taught to lead by example. As a royal, you're taught through proverbs, much the same way that with Solomon, his father aggregated wise men and their proverbs and had them teach Solomon wisdom from an early age through what we call proverbs. In Yoruba, we call that Owe. And any Yoruba family, as with most other tribal families in Africa, we teach our children by proverbs. For example, we say in the Yoruba tongue, "Kaka ki omode pamilayo na to jorobo," which means it's unheard of that a child will be able to deceive his father, because when an old man closes his eyes, he's not really sleeping. He's seeing with an inner eye.
Oh, wow.
And so I remember days when my father would close his eyes to make us feel he was aloof, but he had more insight into our conversations because he seemed absent when he was a lot more present with a thinking mind. So it's hard to deceive the elders because they've seen much across the span of their years.
Do you think that Christianity in Africa is flourishing? You have enjoyed the benefit of operating in a society that was already conservative, even if they were not people of faith. So a lot of the ideas of Christianity, the morals, the notion of God was already inbred into the DNA of the culture. Conversely, we started out that way, but eventually now Christianity becomes an outlier and a naysayer and has more negativity as our culture of our country became increasingly diverse and increasingly liberal and increasingly political. It seems like you have the sway of the culture, but on the other hand, you have Muslims who are building strong influence in the northern part of Nigeria. Your current president is Muslim. Your vice president is Christian. How do you see Christianity in the context of being salt and light in your country?
I'm glad you've asked this question. Let me arrange my thoughts carefully. Nigeria has a quagmire of challenges arising from multiple nations trying to come together to form one nation. Mm-hmm. And the construct in terms of a syllabus and curriculum to start shaping our minds from infancy has been mostly absent for the last 40 years. So the Nigerian mind has not really evolved yet. That's a place where the church must play a role. Now, the church in my father's generation was taught that the priesthood was the exclusive preserve of the clergy. And they divided the church up between clergy and laity. It also taught my father's generation that prayer was something to be done in church and in church alone. And if at all, beyond the church, at the domestic altar in the house. Whereas we strongly believe, according to scripture, in my theological circles here in Africa, that if you look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the scriptures, they style Jesus differently. Matthew styles him as the head of a polity, the king of the Jews, and also the king of creation. Mark styles Christ as an industrialist. You see him in a lot of endeavor. He's moving, he's serving, he's giving, he's healing, he's traveling, he's doing. And he shows us healthcare with feeding the 5,000 and healing them simultaneously, taking 5 loaves and 2 fish and just multiplying that, and saving a lot of that for the young man who gave him the seed capital and sent him back home with much more than he seeded to the venture. Whilst Luke styles him as a culturist. And culture is a powerful force, as you've taught us. Culture coupled with the agrarian world forces what would not normally grow in a location to grow by simply altering climate, atmosphere, irrigation, soil context, soil content, and then you can grow apples in Lagos, but Lagos would not be the normal location for the growth of apples. And then, of course, John escapes the genealogies that Mark, that the two of the synoptics give us, and simply tells us that Jesus is God, that you see him, you see the Father, and he shows us 7 miracles. The 4 cherubim, or the 4 faces of the cherubim, do exactly the same thing. The face of the lion is also the head of the polity, and he is king. The face of the ox symbolizes industry for us, and manufacturing and service industry give us the economy. That's what the economy is made of. And the second face of the cherub is the face of the ox. And the third face was the face of a man, humane, culturist. Again, that's the cultural corner. And culture tells us what our values, norms, and what's acceptable to us. And the things that drive culture are music, entertainment, art, theater, media. Hollywood has shaped global thought for the last 70 years. Nollywood is shaping Nigerian thought in significant ways. And so the cultural space must be an important consideration for the church. And of course, the fourth face of the cherub is the eagle, a symbol for divinity or deity. Now, when Muslims come into a space, they think 4 corners, they think 4 pillars. They seek to seize power in those 4 areas. The church, traditionally in Africa, has sequestered herself into her corner. If I was speaking to a young congregation, I'd say, get out of your corner and let's go center stage. So we're trying to tell the church, if you're going to go into all the world, don't only think geographically, but please also think in terms of the 4 aspects of civilization and society. We've got to go into politics and government, not necessarily the clergy themselves, but we must train our people to be light in that arena and to participate in the polity. Otherwise, somebody else will take over that space to our detriment. So there's no use praying in tongues over here, whilst ungodly men are writing laws that do not favor us in the Senate and in the Congress. Likewise, we want to go into the economy, not dominate mankind, but be most productive in that space, so that we hold a significant part of the economy and as a result have a greater say for our values. Because, Bishop, I don't teach trying to make heaven. Jesus made that possible for us. What I do teach is bringing heaven to earth in culture, in atmosphere, in standards, in principles, in outlook, as Ephesians 1:3 and Ephesians 2:6 teach. And the Lord's Prayer tells us exactly what our purpose is. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. And then we also want our people to go into the cultural space, which House on the Rock does quite naturally. We're taking on the other corners as we learn skills there. And we're pushing our message through arts, theater, music, media, social media, and innovative things that we do, so that the message is not just in what we say, but the excellence with what we do, how we do what we do.
So are you atypical for the modern move amongst Nigerian church, or are you more of an anomaly?
My message is accepted by the youth. They long for it. They run to it because this is what they're seeing in the windows of technology. The windows.
No, what I'm asking is, would you see your moves in terms of? I mean, you were just given a very prestigious award by the Forbes. You have been on television for years. You have a social media staff. You have invaded the upper echelon of Nigeria while serving the destitute and the forlorn. Do you see that amongst many other pastors in your age bracket that gives them distinctions from other pastors, or are you an anomaly that is one of a kind, and others are not following that paradigm shift?
What I think is happening, Bishop, is that it's modeling the future today. Mm-hmm. And so it's setting a trend, and others are beginning to follow, as we also follow others who are setting trends in various aspects of our advancement and progress as a church, helping to lead the progress of the states in Africa.
In the United States, COVID sped up the process of artificial intelligence, technology. Before COVID, most people went to the grocery store. Before COVID, most people went to the restaurant. Before COVID, we did things in a very much as our parents had done for years before. Now, you can order your groceries delivered to your house on an app. Now you can call Uber and have the car come to you and pick you up quite easily. We had to adapt more readily for safety's sake. The world is racing. If you go to Dubai and you go to other places around the world, technology is taking over. Everybody's talking about STEM. It's going to make the difference between whether we keep up or whether we are cast out. It's what we know, not how we feel. Our people have a problem of focusing on how we feel more than what we know. But what we know is going to determine how we eat, not how we feel. Nobody's going to give you a job because you feel. They're going to give you a job because of what you know. As the world changes in this regard, Africa is changing. I was appalled after 7 years of not being on the continent and then stepping back on the continent. In certain areas, I hardly recognized. Everything had changed. It's certain parts of Nigeria, certain parts of Ghana, certain parts of Kenya. Infrastructure's coming in, global dollars are coming in, infusions of capital are coming in. All of that affects the church because in order to do the things you're talking about doing, it takes capital. It's unavoidable. It doesn't take prayer. Prayer will not make your bed in the morning. You can kneel beside it and pray all day, but it will not make your bed in the morning. And I think one of the challenges that I have tried to instill in my visits in Africa is while prayer is important and there are deeply spiritual people over there, action is critical. And I think we've been big on prayer and short on action. Now, if we want the bed made, we have to get up off our knees and go make the bed and then pray on top of it, because God is not going to make our bed in the morning. It's just not going to do it. You have modeled that. You continue to model that. There is an impact that's coming as a result of it. How did COVID change Africa? Or did it?
That's an interesting question. It certainly initially frightened Africa as it did everywhere else in the world. But then we were in lockdown and we realized that we couldn't get around for many months. And we looked across the pond, we looked into the Western Hemisphere, and we realized that you can't bring the economy to seizure. Otherwise, everything else comes to seizure. Mm-hmm. Systems were dying, but quickly, the Western Hemisphere spun on a dime and quickly moved to what they had perhaps already anticipated. And instead of zooming around in planes and cars and motorcycles and transporting ourselves, we literally ported to video screens, to tablets. And we started to do meetings on Zoom calls and in Microsoft Teams. And we learned that we could save a lot of energy, save a lot of time, save executive hours, and still be effective. And we're in pretty much a hybrid status presently in Africa. But because we were behind with technology, some of our governments are realizing that whilst it's important to build transportation, build infrastructure for transportation, but we also have to lay down fiber optics cable and layer the whole space with trunks so that we can get information around much more inexpensively and bridge the gap between Nigeria and the rest of the world as quickly as we can, as with the rest of Africa, by closing the digital gap. And that means we can expedite education, know-how, give technical skills to the artisan class, empower the middle class with a lot more information, and then open up the markets.
I see. I've been talking to a lot of my medical friends. Artificial intelligence enabled us to expedite the process of testing, of vaccines, of cures. The whole world has been impacted as we begin to activate this new form of communicating and evolving and so forth and so on. You mentioned to me offline about some technology that enables you to be able to do the experience in a different kind of way. And to those of you who don't know, the experience is something that Pastor Paul Adefarasin, House of the Rock, is the founder of. It's kind of megafest on steroids. It's huge. It's much bigger than megafest. The population is much, much greater. It fills several stadiums and overfloods all of them. People come from all over the world. It's now being televised all over the world. It's reaching the world. The global community is starting to shake because of it. And we're sitting here talking to its founder. What is technology going to do to the experience?
Well, long term, it allows us to host the experience in multiple venues in multiple nations. And what COVID did to us was it has forced us to do a virtual event, which we did last year. And this year, we're starting out a multiple venue event, or rather a dual venue event. Actually, it's multiple venues, where we will host an event, even though it's pre-recorded in the United States, so that we can create the live feel and the ambient sound of a crowd, because the real attraction of the experience is not really the artists, it's the crowd.
Right.
It's people coming to worship together. And the iconic artists are just a rallying point. They're a banner to harmonize that whole public on and offline into songs that they know that are really established. And it's many things at once. And so this year in 4 different locations, we're pre-recording a live event at the time, but which will be pre-recorded for the play-out event that we'll host here in Lagos. And whilst we're playing out in Lagos, we'll interrupt that play out with live concerts from several artists. It's an interesting thing that it starts at 7 a.m., but really it starts 4 weeks before. The excitement about the experience, setting up and all the rest of that goes on for a while. And then it runs till 6 a.m. the following morning. And what it does is, as a unifier, it brings different denominations together, because we'll be dogmatically estranged from each other as a result of doctrinal differences. But across Africa, we worship essentially to the same music. And America plays a very important part in how we worship. Like I said, the Word of Faith brought a contemporary movement to Africa, which many of our leaders who are now in their 70s and 80s subscribe to. Then a couple of decades after that, you bounded to the scene globally and affected the church and threw us into a paradigm shift on many issues, and the manner in which we present the gospel, so that we are relative and as a result truly redemptive in our causes. And the beauty of all that was that now leaders started to come together because their congregations were flocking to the experience. And so to be part of that and not lose their congregations, they had to show up also. And that gave us an opportunity to sit down as peers, which is an important thing for leadership to grasp, that just because one generation is a lot older, and we do have an ageism problem in Africa, but it also has its benefits, that revelation belongs to the generation that's that. Most generally, whilst wisdom is the preserve of often the elderly or the aged, the experienced, and that the two are meant to work together. So Samuel had his day, but he goes up to a greater day and now becomes coach. And David can kill giants. He can settle the scores with Israel's enemies. He can provide largesse from God's providences for his son to enjoy the peace of his conquest and also have the wherewithal now to develop infrastructure and make Israel a great state. And we see that as possibilities where a church like the one I pastor is in the cultural space and has little tentacles going into the other spaces. But a church like my friend Bojo Oyemade, he's in the public sector and he runs an event on scale similar to that of the experience. And that deals with issues pertinent to government and politics. And then some of our other friends are in the economy, like the City of David. They are strongly in the banking, fintech, and finance world, so they know how to create wealth and use that for the projects. And we're finding that if we stay in our corner, we're going to end up in competition. But if we go center stage and embrace all four corners, we have collaborative impact, which we see in Acts 19. Paul went into Ephesus and he took the economy, he took the public sector, he threw down their deities, and he challenged their industry and their economy. Demetrius came and said, hey, this guy is turning our world around, and he's disrupted our economy, and he's also taken away the worship of our deity. And within 2 years, Bishop, the message of Christ, which was not a religious message, was revolutionary in thought. It took the whole of the then known region. Whilst he went to the corner for the first 3 months of his excursion into Grecia, into Ephesus, he won not one believer, not one convert, whilst he was in the corner at the synagogue. So he moved to the University of Tyrannus, and there he gave exposure for the message of Christ to the four corners of civilization: culture, deity, the economy, and of course, politics and government. And
that's fascinating.
It's a strategy that we feel is working because we've had a lot of competition. If something is hurting and impairing the impact of the church in Africa, it's the competition. And the sons of Sceva were trying to compete with Paul of Tarsus, and they looked at a strong demoniac in the space at the time and said, in the name of Jesus, who Paul preaches, come out of him. And the demons, forgive the use of the term, they must have looked, because normally when you use that name, it commands authority. 1 second, 10 seconds, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Nothing happened. And they realized that these men were not authorized agents of the authority of God. And they pounced on him and sent them back home. Birthday suits.
I love the way you told it. We're almost out of time. I just want to conclude by in about a 5-minute summarization. If you could close your eyes and see the Africa of the future and how it relates to America and London. I'm kind of looking for a Dr. King moment where he said Black children and white children and brown children will one day join hands and sing. What could we do together and dream with me for about 5 minutes about what we could do together, and how do we need to think differently about you? Not you individually, but about African people. That's a lot to put in 5 minutes.
Bishop, you are our future. You have exposure to technology's opportunities. You've walked in the power of technology. You are a melting pot civilization of different strengths, from the Hamitic peoples, the Japhetic peoples, and the Semitic peoples. And so you're futuristically modeling to the world as the great state that God has put his hand on, the United States of America. And that serves us well in that you are the pioneering nation of the world today. Whilst as Africa, we offer you your roots so that you can have stable equivalence in the global village. And in discovering your roots, we discover our fruit. And together we are one tree. We were separated by time and by a great pond and by the wickedness of man to man. But I see an Africa that stretches far beyond her shores. I see an Africa that is not sequestered to her continent. I see an Africa that plays a dominant role, not over and above the other races, but with equivalence, as the scripture suggests, in leading the way forward. I quickly remember a scripture and a prophecy on the basis of that scripture, that there's coming a time when, to navigate the wilderness of the difficulty of the close of this age, Hobab in scripture was called upon by Moses, that to cross the terrain of this difficult wilderness, you have to be eyes for us, because nobody knows tough times and the trials like you do. And Hobab accepted, and he became scout to navigate an important nation at the time through their difficulty into their promised land. And I believe, Bishop, that Africa holds an important key. One, we are the second largest continent on the earth. Two, there is so much resource underneath our feet in Africa that God has hidden it in the midst of our darkness. But that hidden treasure will come to light when the church comes to the knowledge of who she is as the reflection and the image of God the Father and the Son, who reflect one another as one person. And as we find our light and find ourselves as one people in many different parts of the world, I believe that Africa will shine the light like she did for Moses in his crossing the wilderness into the promised land, and like a black gentleman helped Jesus to carry his cross across the last furlongs in his walk up the Via Dolorosa to Calvary's brow, where he did destruction to the enemy's work. And I truly believe that Africa will gain technology. Africa will become virgin ground in the vast expanse of untouched land to demonstrate God's prowess in development, in infrastructural growth, in equity and justice for all her people. I believe that Africa will model, like she did in previous times, civilization on a brand new level. I believe that the African mind, once it's properly exposed to opportunities in enlightenment and education, becomes a very strong mind. And when you haven't had something, like Paul didn't have Christ, and you're given the opportunity, you lap it up like a hungry man. I believe Africa's about to come into her fore. And I feel privileged to have you as a father, a mentor, my pastor, my spiritual leader, and also somebody who models many of these graces across the spaces we endeavor in, to stand on your shoulders. It gives me such opportunity to be born into this time and take a useless life like mine and make it useful to the development of our continent and our country. And I see that our people are hungry for growth. We're tired of seeing it on CNN and seeing all the wonderful things on our tablet windows that are ongoing elsewhere in the world. We want that at home, but we believe that God himself will give that to us, not merely by us praying, but by our thinking and by our taking action in the thoughts that he delivers to us. I believe Africa will rise again. I believe one day every single African boy and girl will have the opportunity for education that's innovative, that's qualitative, and that's relevant to the circumstances we face in today's hour and in today's time. I believe that Africa will win her respect back as a standing force amidst the people of the earth. I believe that Africa will come to the fullness of her purpose and God's prophetic meaning for the people of Africa. God is never arbitrary. He never does anything by mistake. And our challenges, though we face them today, they are not unknown to him. He's not surprised. And I believe that we are the answer. I believe the church is the answer. And I believe the thinking church will have an important role to play in the resurgence of Africa. And again, Africa that is far more than just the people on the continent, but the people who are in her diaspora, whether they left 100 years ago, 50 years ago, or 300 years ago. God bless Africa, and God bless Africa.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, you have just heard an amazing dissertation, powerful conversation, climactic conclusion to a dialogue across the waters of brothers who have been separated by bondages, chains, and ships, and reconnected through technology and the blood of the cross. It has been a profound and distinguished honor to have this opportunity to present to you the vast mind of Pastor Paul Adefarasin, through which we are able to catch glimpses of a society and a people to which we are rooted and committed and connected. Thank you, Paul, so very, very much for sharing with our students such a rich conversation and a rich dialogue. I'm sure their biggest regret will not be, it will be the thousands of questions that they're going to, you'll have to add him on Instagram and ask questions if you please, and he can answer at his leisure. But Pastor Paul Adefarasin and House on the Rock is not hard to find. Thank you again for being here. That was amazing. God bless.
You too, Bishop.